Hello and welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss my conclusions that I've drawn from studying American history. By no means do I expect that you're going to agree with everything I say, or even that what I say is the end all be all of everything. But you should know about the events I'm talking about, and the events that I spend time on are significant and important and not should not be dismissed. We have a problem in this culture in that um, the slavery, Jim Crow, racial oppression, these events and facts of history should be taught. But we have a problem. Critical race theory is not history, it is indoctrination, it's propaganda. For somebody to say now that because you're white, you're incapable of not, you can't not be a racist, um, is as bad as the old racists saying, well, because you're black, you can't think complicated things, do, higher level education, achieve uh, success in business. You just don't have the ability. It's the same thing. You can't characterize a certain group of people by the color of their skin or by their culture, and it's white and black means culture. It's something to do with I'm not white, I'm kind of yellowish. Um, White and black are cultural connotations and have no realistic significance because there are many black cultures and there are many white cultures. In fact, there's cultures within families, cultures within neighborhoods, locations in the country, and generally. So, the things we value, the things we lift up, the things that we hold dear. And there are many things that are similar, but the fact is that you can't honestly say that this race is not capable of this or is only capable of that, because if you know enough people in that race, there's a wide variety. I think the biggest problem with a lot of white people, and because I'm considered white, um, estimations of black people is they don't know enough black people to know the big differences and the big cultural differences and the fact that this group here is different than that group there. And the same with black people. You might not know white people except as being, you know, they're there when you go to work. And so I think there's an element of racism, and it is Marxist. Critical theory is Marxist, but that's understandable in this country since the Depression of 1873. Marxism has begun playing a very big part in our labor issues and race issues. So that's the way it is. But that being said, as I've always impressed upon people, slavery is an extremely significant factor in our history. And so is the oppression and the failure of Reconstruction and the civil rights movement. These are all important things. And if you don't know African American history, you can't know American history. You're like, it's like somebody who gets a meal in front of them and only eats the piece of bread. It's a huge steak and all these other vegetables and desserts, but he eats a piece of bread and says, look, I ate my dinner. No, it's not the same. So we're discussing today white Baptist Southerners' accommodations to slavery. They went from generally being opposed to it to actually arguing for it as a beneficial institution for both black and white. Why did that happen? So I wrote a paper on that. I published it at academia.edu, which is where you can publish. It wasn't not peer reviewed or anything like that. So not published in an article in a journal. So you can criticize it, but these are my findings, my beliefs. And I'm going to cough, so bear with me. Sorry. Okay. Methodist evangelists George Whitefield and John Wesley, in a series of messages preached to the general public in an ongoing event now called the First Great Awakening, had a great influence on evangelicals on the colonies beginning in the 1740s, not only through sermons, but personal letters as well. And I refer you to Alan Gailey's article in the Journal of Southern History, The Origins of Slaveholders' Paternalism, George Whitefield, the Bryan Family, and the Great Awakening in the South. So now, becoming a Baptist or becoming a member of almost any evangelical denomination represented a revolt, so to speak, of the existing social order as presented in Rees Isaacs' article for the William and Mary Quarterly, Evangelical Revolt, the Nature of the Baptist Challenge to the Traditional Order in Virginia, 1765 to 1775. So evangelicals, Baptists in particular, spoke out against the lifestyles and behavior of Southern gentry. And I refer you to the Southern Cross, the Hireman's book I mentioned previously. There were there was no absolute witness across the board against the institution of slavery itself, but many voices, led by the influence of Whitefield, were concerned that slaves should be treated more kindly and receive religious instruction and be taught about salvation from hell through Jesus Christ. Um, and that's also from Gailey. Um, so there were, however, notable Baptist voices that outspokenly condemned the holding of slaves as a part of the wickedness of the social order. Okay, that was an important part of their condemnation of the social order. In a letter to the Baptists upon leaving Virginia in 1791, one of them, John Leland, who was instrumental in making sure that James Madison put in the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. So he's a very important Baptist figure in history. And I'm reading from the writings of the late Elder John Leland. And here's his quote, and it's a very important quote. And this is from 1791. It is not my intention to drop the ministerial vest and assume the politician's garb today. But after adding that slavery in its best appearance is a violent deprivation of the rights of nature, inconsistent with republican government, destructive of every humane and benevolent passion of the soul, and subversive to that liberty necessary to ennoble the human mind, let me ask whether heaven has nothing in store for poor Negroes better than these galling chains. If so, ye ministers of Jesus and saints of the Most High, ye wrestling Jacobs, who have power with God and can prevail over the angel, let your prayers, your ardent prayers, ascend to the throne of God incessantly, that he may pour the blessings of freedom upon poor blacks. So that's John Leland, and very, very powerful quotation. He is a very powerful preacher. Another Baptist, Robert Carter, at one time prominent in Virginia government and a former slave owner, wrote to a friend in London, and I'm quoting from Semple's A History of the Rise and Progress of the Baptists in Virginia. He said, the toleration of slavery indicates great depravity of mind. Then we have the Catoctin Baptist Association determined in 1787 that, quote, from Semple's book, Semple also, that hereditary slavery was a breach of the divine law. A Baptist preacher of the American Revolution, David Barrow, preached that it was, quote, this is from Essig's The Bonds of Wickedness, American Evangelicals Against Slavery, 1770 to 1808. He said, it's criminal to hold Negroes in slavery. Baptists at that time, L. Hayne and Winchester, exhorted Virginians in 1774 that the slave trade involved, quote, every vice that blackens and degrades human nature. That's also from Essig's Bond of Wickedness. In addition, Baptist congregations early on consisted of lower class whites, women, and blacks, both slave and free, although blacks were often segregated from whites in worship. And that's from Southern Cross. In spite of that, there were a small number of white and black congregations who were founded and or preached to by black preachers. That's from Gordon S. Wood's Republican Religion and Empire of Liberty, the history of the early republic, 1789 to 1815. It's also important to note that slavery was more brutal and inhumane in its practice during the colonial period than in the antebellum period before the Civil War. And that's from Galley's book, Article 2. While by no means an era of racial equality, the colonial period was a time when notable voices spoke out against inhumane treatment of slaves and against the institution itself, while in certain circumstances, blacks and whites could worship together, if not in the most egalitarian conditions. And black preachers could exhort congregations containing whites. How that changed is a significant event in American religious history. And American religious history is very close to my heart. So we're going to talk about socioeconomic and cultural conditions next. I thank you for watching. I enjoy doing this. You don't have to agree with me, but you should know and have your own opinions about this. One of the failures of conservatives in the United States, especially in the last 20 years, as discounting the experience, the slavery and Jim Crow and oppression, and not taking it seriously, just kind of writing it off as a side issue. That opens the door for the Marxism. and opens the door for the evil that we have now. So, anyway, thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.